Hello, and welcome to Makeshift Stories. Thank you for listening. You can help us out by telling your friends about us and getting them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Now, open your imagination and take a journey into the improbable as you listen to Makeshift Stories 167, Ken Likeley, Accidental Interdimensional Drifter, in Mistaken Identity Part 2, read by Mitchell Tew. Ken stared at what he assumed was a very small person in a gray alien costume. No one mentioned it was a masquerade party, he muttered to himself, making a mental note to complain to the Municipal Bylaw Enforcement Conference organizers about their haphazard approach to delivering key information. For heaven's sake, there had even been a workshop on improving communications. Maybe they needed to attend some of their own sessions. He'd note that too in his email. The 4-foot-high person in the costume blinked its exceptionally large brown puppy eyes, waiting for Ken to say something. Ken blinked back in response. He found himself stunned by the realism of the blinking. How did one get a costume to do that? He speculated this could be some new type of technology, fake eyes or contact lenses or something, which made it hard to tell if a property owner was lying. It would be a new challenge to bylaw enforcement, and he, Ken Likeley, was going to be on the cutting edge of this trend. He could almost forgive his supervisor for insisting he fly here. He decided this must be a special session, and the rather short costume person a test of his skills of perception. So, he made 2 exaggerated blinks, followed by a wink, then waited. The unusually short person in the alien costume seemed to hesitate, then simply stared at Ken expectantly. Ken noted how large the head was, and how impossibly thin the arms and legs were, and made another conjecture. Maybe it was a robot. Were irate property owners starting to confront bylaw enforcement client relations specialists such as himself with machines? Wow! He really needed to be at this conference. So, getting into the spirit of gaining new insight into the tactics of technically advanced aggrieved clients, he said, thanks for inviting me.
No problem at all, Mr. Likeley. It is our honor to have you here. However, the schedule is tight, given the temporal nature of wormholes, and that kind of thing. We need to start.
Ken didn't understand what wormholes had to do with a conference schedule, but decided to keep an open mind. The little gray costume person led him down a hall, hidden behind the crashed flying saucer in the temporary Roswell exhibit, which opened into a space dominated by a large disco ball reflecting dazzling blue and green laser light everywhere. The fleeting beams bounced off various odd parts of a rather sparse crowd scattered around the room, intended to hold 5 times as many people. No one appeared amused by the thumping bass of the 1970s disco music or the flashing laser light. It was a very serious group, Ken noted. And where had the conference organizers found so many 4-foot-high actors, he wondered. Well, it was Las Vegas. Maybe they had a stage show somewhere, he rationalized. Despite his misgivings, he felt himself becoming impressed. The conference had gone all out to make client relations specialists such as himself aware of this new and challenging threat to transparent city-to-property owner communication. He looked around the room and noted he was the only person not in costume. Maybe they handed them out after you registered or something. He was relieved to spot a few 2-meter-high Egyptian-like figures with muscular, triangular-shaped upper bodies, ending in dog-like heads, standing around the edges of the room, watching with glowing red eyes. Maybe he'd get one of those suits. They were pretty darn cool. The word Anubis came to Ken's mind. Intermixed with the grays mingling in the center of the room, he noted another type of figure, who somehow avoided the flashing laser beams, so he hadn't noticed them before. These ones were tall, somewhat portly-looking creatures, with spade-shaped heads and sprouts of red hair, which made Ken laugh and give them the name Carrot Tops.
Sentient entities,
the gray, who had led Ken into the room, cheerily announced over the PA system, muting the music. The guests, most of which appeared to consider themselves sentient, stopped to pay attention.
Mr. Likeley has arrived.
There was a low murmur, then silence. Ken was anything but the type of person who wanted to be the center of attention at a party. So, at the mention of his name, he tried to melt into the imitation limestone wallpaper which covered most of the hall. But both his skin and the wallpaper had apparently signed a non-cooperation agreement, so instead of disappearing, he stood out like a bright pink balloon, stuck to the faux gray rock. When were they going to give him his own alien costume? Ken waved nervously to the suddenly silent and critical room. Hi, Ken managed to stutter. All ears, tentacles, tube-like protuberances, and whatevers focused on him, visibly irritated they had been interrupted in mid-drink. Sensing the mood of the room, and noting there was less than 24 individuals in total, Ken quickly recalled the city's rules around entertainment expense claims, crossed his shaking fingers behind his back, hoped his supervisors would sign off, then announced in a stuttering voice, next round is on me? That appeared to placate the glaring costumed guests and make the small gray who had introduced him relax and ask,
So, it's been a good quarter then, human?
It made a face reminiscent of a smile.
A disappointingly small crowd tonight.
It nodded to the center of the hall.
They all need to reinvest. We can't afford to have anyone bail. It might trigger a margin call. So, your and my necks are on the line here. I just wanted you to understand the stakes. I look forward to your presentation. It better be good.
It stated sternly, then scooted away to join a small knot of grays and carrot tops. Ken noticed the projection screen behind a gold-inlaid podium at the far end of the room, displaying a schedule on a larger projection screen. Currently, the 6 p.m. slot was highlighted, along with a session name, Cross-Species Networking, sponsored by Trifid Nebula Asset Management. On misreading the title as Trifid, Ken's brain decided to take a nostalgic side trip to a night 35 years ago when he couldn't quite get to sleep because he had snuck back into the living room, then turned on the TV to watch the end of Day of the Trifids. It was a 1962 B-movie about carnivorous, mobile plants who arrived on Earth in a meteor shower that conveniently blinds almost every human in England. This allowed the director to simply have actors stumble into the slow-moving plants, which looked a lot to Ken like a bunch of angry kale with celery legs, to be juiced and eaten. The climax of the movie was still indelibly burned into his brain. The hungry plants had the heroine and hero trapped at the top of a lighthouse, when, in an act of desperation, the doomed humans turned the fire hose on the advancing salad of death. The fire hose filled with seawater melts the menacing legions of greens, turning them into something like harmless soggy spinach. Apparently, salt was a dangerous toxin to them. As a 7-year-old, he became determined to never be an aperitif for a meat-eating plant. Thus, to this day, Ken avoided leafy green veggies and added way too much salt to everything he ate. He read down the agenda, spotting his name in a row after opening remarks. Third quarter results and projections, Sol System weather derivatives, Ken Likeley, fund manager. Likeley was spelt wrong. Ken tried for a second time to disappear into the faux stone wall, which apparently had no effect because a diminutive gray approached and asked if he wanted a drink. Bloody Mary extra salt and skip the celery, Ken said without thinking. The gray nodded and scurried off. Noticing Ken, one of the carrot tops broke away from an animated discussion with a few grays and sort of flowed its way toward him. Ken noticed it didn't really have legs and left a kind of mucus trail behind it on the carpet. The creature nodded at one of the Anubis standing on the opposite side of the room from Ken. The tall figure peeled away from its post to follow the spade-headed thing, which had already cornered Ken between a large black tower and plastic-potted palm tree. The Anubis stood, back toward them, scanning the room, hiding the encounter and making sure no one could approach. The carrot top leaned in menacingly and began to whisper,
"Psst, Kenny, dude! Unreal! How'd you end up here? This is not your scene, man."
The large carrot top probed, green spittle spraying a coating on Ken's left ear. Ken tried to melt into the wall, but the wall was still having nothing to do with helping him, and stood its ground.
Hey, sorry, man.
The Carrot Top tried to wipe Ken's ear.
I'm not in this form very often these days,
it apologized.
Thought you were tooling around at some drag of a conference on the city man's bread. This scene is so not you, and you're not the Ken these bad cats were expecting, man. You need to split before this crowd gets down and groks who you really are.
Leaf?
Shh, cool it, man. Me and Planet,
Leaf motioned at the Anubis guarding them,
are like undercover fuzz here, dig it? Chill, dude, while I figure out how to make you split before they notice you're gone, or get you up to speed on the scam your little gray pal is running so you can bogart your way through this. You don't want to see what these dudes are like when they get unglued, and man, they're ready to flip as it is. Well, let's just say some of them have lost big, and they're looking for blood. You picking up what I'm laying down, man?
So then, Ken ventured, this isn't a VIP costume party for the Municipality's City Planning and Building Code Enforcement Association's annual national conference? Ken questioned, already suspecting the answer. By the way, I like the getup, Leaf. It looks real. Ken complimented, experimentally pinching the ridgeline of Leaf's spade-shaped face.
Ow, dude, stop, that hurts.
Ken quickly withdrew his hand and put it in a pocket. His brain ran multiple scenarios at the processing limit of his caffeine-starved synapses, which meant he did nothing for several dozen seconds, while his brain worked on something resembling a rational explanation for its current environment. Based on the results of his pinching experiment, it rejected most of his initial conclusions, momentarily considered regression analysis, because Ken once had lunch with an enthusiastic person from the Business Intelligence Department who had told him of such things, then settled on the following probabilities. 1. Ken was having a lucid dream. 2. The people in his office, angry at him for voting against the Halloween party last fall, had set him up, and now he was the brunt end of some weird hazing ritual for first-time conference attendees. 3. Leaf and Planet were aliens sent to spy on him. 4. This was real. 5. None of the above. His brain struggled, then settled on 5, which was particularly unhelpful, given his need to figure out what to do. The conference room doors were slammed shut and locked by something on the other side, making Ken jump.
Hope you were a fast learner, Kenny dude,
Leaf noted sarcastically.
Sentience!
The word almost deafened Ken, and shook his insides so much that he instinctively looked for the closest washroom. Apparently, the large black tower he had been forced against was a massive speaker.
Bummer, man. Looks like we're out of time. Kenny, you're going to have to do this, dude. Stick this in your ear, and only say what I tell you.
Leaf reached into a fold in his skin and pulled out what looked like a small wireless earbud. Ken looked at the proffered device askance. Do you have any sanitizer?
Dude!
Leaf complained, then jabbed the device into Ken's left ear.
Really, man? This ain't the time. These cats mean business. I'll be in your ear, hang tough, and do only what I'm laying on you. Dig it? We'll get through this hairy scene, man. Just don't freak on me.
The music stopped, and the small crowd, such as it was, went slowly silent, with the exception of a bunch of Carrot Tops.
Sentience! It's time to begin.
The Gray who had talked to Ken said again in a strident tone. It was standing behind the podium, glaring at the self-absorbed group until they noticed and stopped talking.
Thank you.
It paused for effect.
Thank you for coming. I realize this place is a bit out of the way.
A few of the Grays laughed at the understatement.
But I'm confident the financial product we are about to tell you about will more than make up for that little inconvenience and the unexpected drop in the price of scandium. Who could have guessed Epsilon Indi would have an entire planet made of the stuff?
One of the Anubis coughed loudly.
Exception noted,
the Gray grumbled, then continued.
As you know, we at ARP Singularity Capital Management have been creating innovative financial instruments for the last quarter rotation of the galaxy. We offer these hugely profitable investments to clients such as yourselves who recognize the uniqueness and potential. All of you benefited handsomely from our hedge fund, which included solar flare derivatives from the new Loopy system. While everyone poured money into so-called safe investments, like resort hotels on the fabulous white sand beaches of New Loopy 3, we created a long-term strategy based on the stability of that system's star. Everyone claimed the solar weather would be stable for millions of years. Who knew a rogue stellar core fragment would hit New Loopy? The Grey gave an exaggerated wink, causing decades of massive solar flare activity and a spike in demand for interstellar evacuation transportation. The more savvy among you will know our New Loopy hedge fund held 80% positions in both the solar flare derivative and in the emergency evac transport sector. A perfectly balanced fund. During calm solar weather, the derivative paid out to prop up evac transport prices. And well, as you know, when solar flare activity took off, evac prices went through the roof, along with your profits. The money paid back to the derivative by the evacs when they hit peak price, well, that was just icing on the cake, wasn't it? We understand the other 20% position in the fund was owned by a stellar engineering company, noted for its proprietary technology used to move stellar cores and sloppy project management. Just a coincidence, of course. Everyone won, although I wouldn't recommend a vacation on New Loopy 3, even with sunblock.
The Grey laughed at its own joke, and general applause broke out around the room, along with the nodding of heads or waving of arm-like things in agreement. Clearly, most of the room had done well on the disaster. The Grey waited for its audience to calm down.
And now, we want to introduce you to our new product. If you read through the information packet we provided at the start of today's event, you'll find data on several proof of concepts we've run on this planet. The 1929 stock market crash, the 1973 oil crisis, and, my personal favorite, the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis. Please check those out while our local hedge fund manager, Ken Likeley, makes his way to the podium. We'll also be sending you the details on tonight's lucrative offering. Our Terra hedge fund, consisting of a climate change derivative and emergency services sector position, similar to New Loopy, and backed by the other sentients of this world, the reptilian Lemurians, who currently find this place a bit too chilly.
The crowd began to murmur excitedly and pull from skin folds and out of thin air various reading devices. The Grey, who had offered Ken a drink, cut in front of Leaf, handed Ken a very large and salty-looking Bloody Mary, then motioned for him to follow. But, Ken began to protest. Leaf winked, and Ken could suddenly hear him in his left ear.
Chill, man. Go with the flow, Kenny. Me and Planet got this covered. Remember, just do and say what I tell you. You're solid, man. Just don't flip your wig.
The very surprisingly strong, small Grey had taken Ken's free arm and was literally dragging him to the podium. Instinctively, Ken focused on not spilling his drink on the ornate carpet. With a last push, he found himself on top of the podium, which had somehow risen, so he was standing several feet above the eager crowd. Ken turned around to see his name in large letters on the projection screen, spelt wrong, or right, he finally realized, depending on your point of view. He stalled, then coughed, causing feedback in the mic.
Kenny.
A tiny version of Leaf's voice squawked in his ear.
Say good evening, Sentients. It's great to see you all here.
At that moment, Ken's throat decided to tell Ken's brain, in a rather demanding and self-centered way, that it was dry itchy, and generally not in a good mood, and would refuse to go along with whatever was currently transpiring, unless it had a drink. Ken's brain, tired of the constant complaining and wanting to sate the stubborn body part as fast as possible so it would get on with delivering the message, ordered Ken's left hand to move the drink it was still holding to Ken's mouth. The contents of which were the result of a Gray who had never made the drink before and who was tired of being the bartender anyway because they had ambitions to achieve more. So, without checking the recipe, it added about 30% by volume salt, 30% Tabasco because it couldn't find any Worcestershire sauce, then filled the remaining volume with tomato juice. Upon contact with Ken's uppity throat, the throat being immediately disgusted, rebelled, didn't bother informing Ken's brain, took over control of Ken's mouth and lungs, and spit the obnoxious liquid out in a fine spray. The first row of aliens edged back from the stage. Ken's brain now kicked in. Recalling the lighthouse scene in Day of the Triffids, it noticed how the aliens were backing away. It also had an overwhelming fear of public speaking, which it would do anything to avoid. Putting the two together, Ken's brain told Ken's hand to fling the contents of the glass at the audience. It watched the result. Either Ken's eyes were watering, or the stunned aliens were beginning to melt. Before it could determine which, the lights suddenly went out, plunging the scene into absolute darkness. Ken opened his eyes, then jumped back, almost tripping over a pail of compost, when he found himself staring into the crinkly deep green leaves of a rather large, well-fed-looking kale plant.
Hey, man! Welcome back!
Ken turned toward the familiar voice and discovered he was standing in Leaf's pyramid-shaped greenhouse. His vegan hippie neighbor, pearly whites exposed in a big smile, was standing by the triangular door next to Planet, his dog. Planet was wagging her tail expectantly.
Psychedelic, right, Kenny dude? Pyramid power is where it's at. Great veggies are just the tip of the old iceberg. It's real killer tech. Really, man. No security lineup. Just A to B in 0 minutes and organic snacks to boot.
Ah! Ken choked out and backed away from the tray of kale and cabbage plants edging towards the door. Stunned, he squeezed between Leaf and Planet and was pleasantly surprised to see his luggage had miraculously found its way back as well. Without saying anything more, he staggered home, head spinning. A few of the more diligent and stubborn neurons in his brain briefly took it upon themselves to try and make sense of the last few hours, became realistic about the futility of such a daunting task, gave up, and decided instead to flood their neighbors with endorphins. I think I just saved the world, Ken muttered as he dragged his luggage over the dandelion-infested field, which was pretending to be grass in Leaf's backyard. Makeshift Stories is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB Financial. To listen to other great APN award-winning podcasts such as That's a Thing, a sometimes belated, already outdated guide to your teens, tweens, and everything under 20, please head over to albertapodcastnetwork.com. This episode is brought to you in part by the Alberta Blue Cross Wellness Summit, happening October 10th, 2019. The Wellness Summit is a day to explore fresh perspectives and practices around wellness. This year, the focus is on creating healthy workplace cultures where everyone thrives. Supporting the health and wellness of employees is becoming a major consideration for many workplaces, and Alberta Blue Cross wants to connect the dots of what it takes to create a healthier workplace with happy people. Among the speakers is Ryan Picarella, president of the Wellness Council of America, which helps employers build results-oriented workplace wellness programs. He'll be leading a discussion on that very important topic. Alberta Blue Cross designed the summit so you won't just be sitting around and listening. You'll have a chance to actively engage with the information, the speakers, and other attendees. You'll come away with practical tools and evidence-based resources you can use, whether you're a frontline worker or a C-suite executive. Connection happens here. Learn more at and register at thewellnesssummit.ca and be there at the Renaissance Edmonton Airport Hotel on October 10th, 2019. Makeshift Stories is released twice a month around the 1st and the 15th. This month's story was written by Alan V. Hare and read by Mitchell Tew. Opening and closing theme, Magical Mystery by 8th Mode Music, is licensed from Audio Jungle on a Music Mass Reproduction license. If you'd like to connect with us, please send an email to makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. Links to both are in the show notes. You can help us out by writing a review on Stitcher Radio or Apple Podcasts or any of your favorite podcast services. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons Non-Commercial Attribution No Derivative license, which means that you are free to share our stories. Just remember to credit us and don't alter anything.